Of two daughters, I am the oldest and go by Barbara. I've always been the serious one, the independent one, from as long back as I can remember. Michelle, my sister, was precisely the reverse. Our house was always noisy growing up. Michelle's laughter, Mom and Dad's loving attention on her, and the continual buzz of pop tunes running in the background. Me, I liked peaceful areas, my nose buried in a book or focusing on homework. Birthdays and holidays always made it very evident how different Michelle and I were. She would tear through her presents, squealing with delight over the newest devices or fashion-forward clothing. I, on the other hand, meticulously saved any money I got. "What are you saving for Ratch this time?" Dad would inquire, a trace of pride in his voice, but his eyes revealed he lacked total understanding. "A laptop for learning," I said. "The library computers are often crowded." He nodded, but I could see they didn't understand why I didn't desire what other girls my age did. Michelle was a swirl of fresh ideas and constant pressure. "Mom, did you check out the latest iPhone? Every student at the institution carries it. I need it," she would say. She would also receive it. No questions, no saving. I recall the day I at last paid for my laptop. Months of savings had gone on investigating the ideal model. I felt quite proud when I got it home. "Look, at last I understand," I declared at dinner. Mom turned her head from her dish. "That's great, sweetheart. Oh, Michelle, tell us about your mall day." And the topic changed exactly like that. Michelle descended into a protracted narrative about her shopping trip, and my success vanished from view. It was not that they did not love me. I knew they did in their own unique manner. But Michelle was the sun in our family's solar system, and I was a far-off planet gently revolving on my own path. The variations between us just grew as we grew older. Michelle followed the most current fashion trends and experimented with wild hair. I stayed with my comfy trousers and sensible ponytail. The library became my quiet haven where I could concentrate on my objectives, free from any interruptions. When it came time for college, I gave all I had on applications. I stayed late many nights honing essays, investigating scholarships, and preparing for admission tests. One of the finest times of my life came when I received my acceptance letter bearing a full scholarship. Running into the kitchen, I waved the letter. "Dad, Mom, I entered under a full scholarship." Mom turned to help Michelle with her makeup. "That's lovely, sweetheart. Hold steady, Michelle. I'm trying to get your eyeliner exactly correct." Dad turned to check his newspaper. "Good work, Barbara." Nothing less was what we expected. Their lack of enthusiasm wounded, but I was used to it. I returned to my room clutching the letter. This was my opportunity to at last escape, to prove myself. Michelle hardly made it through high school in meantime. The day Sarah handed her failing report card, I considered our parents might at last be let down. Rather, though, they encircled her with encouragement. Mom, patting her hair, whispered, "Oh, sweetie, don't worry. Everyone does not find college to be ideal. You are quite gifted in many other areas." Dad nodded. "That's right, princess. You will figure out your road." It still astounds me. "Are you sincere?" She almost made it. I blurted forward. Mom fixed me a stern glance. "Barbara, try not to be nasty. Your sister is endowed with various gifts." I bit my tongue, then turned to go. Michelle would always be their favorite, no matter what I accomplished. Attaching college was a fresh beginning. I was surrounded for the first time by people that valued diligence and drive. Resolved to maximize this opportunity, I immersed myself into my studies. In my second year, one day I got a call from home. It was Michelle, her voice as usual lively. "Ratch, guess what? I consider enrolling in some classes on beauty. Mom and Dad find that to be a fantastic idea." Though I knew she wouldn't care, I wanted to tell her about the research project I was working on or the summer internship I had landed. After hanging up, I felt both frustrated and motivated. I was on my own path, and I was going to make it count. Years passed quickly. While Michelle jumped from one beauty course to the next without finishing anything, I graduated with honors. I got a job at a top company even before my diploma was dry. Moving into my own apartment was a bittersweet moment. As I unpacked my few belongings, I thought about how different my life was from Michelle's. She was still at home, pampered by our parents, while I was standing on my own, ready to take on the world. The first few months at my job were a blur. I worked longer hours than anyone else, determined to prove myself. Within a year of hard work, I was promoted to team leader. Excited, I called home to share the news. Mom picked up the phone. "Oh, Barbara, that's nice, but guess what? Michelle met the most wonderful boy. He comes from such a good family. We're all so thrilled." As she went on about Michelle's new boyfriend, my promotion seemed to disappear into the background. I hung up, feeling deflated, but it only made me more determined. If my family couldn't value my achievements, I'd just have to achieve even more. I threw myself into my work with everything I had. Days turned into nights and weekends became extra opportunities to get ahead. My hard work paid off. One promotion led to another, and before long, I became the youngest department head in the company's history. One day, Mr. Paul, the company owner, called me into his office. "Barbara, your work has been outstanding. We've never had someone rise through the ranks so quickly," he said with a smile. "Thank you, sir. I love what I do," I replied, beaming with pride. "And it shows," he said. "That's why I want to offer you something special. We have a program for top employees, a chance to buy an apartment at a significant discount. You've earned it." The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork and planning. When I finally got the keys to my new apartment, I felt like I was floating. I decided to host a housewarming party to celebrate with the people who mattered most. Since I didn't have much furniture yet, I bought some inexpensive plastic tables and chairs and set everything up with care. Even the disposable tableware matched the decor. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, and I was proud of it. On the day of the party, my colleagues arrived first, bringing thoughtful gifts and warm congratulations. Then my family showed up. Mom, Dad, and Michelle came in like a whirlwind. Michelle's eyes darted around the room, taking in the modest furnishings. I caught the smirk she tried to hide. As the evening went on, I noticed a pattern. Every time one of my colleagues congratulated me or brought up my accomplishments, my parents would quickly change the subject to Michelle. "Oh, that reminds me," Mom said, cutting off one of my coworkers mid-sentence. "Did Barbara tell you about Michelle's latest modeling gig? She's just so photogenic." Dad chimed in. "Yes, our Mel was born for the spotlight. Such natural talent." I saw the confused and slightly uncomfortable looks on my colleagues' faces as the focus shifted from my achievements to Michelle once again. I wanted to disappear into the floor. Michelle, on the other hand, soaked up the attention. "Oh, Mom, stop it," she'd say with a giggle, clearly enjoying every second. Finally, thankfully, my family left. The moment the door closed, my coworker Laura turned to me, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Barbara, what the hell was that?" she asked, her voice low and concerned. I shrugged, trying to brush it off. "Oh, that's just how they are." Another colleague, David, shook his head. "No, Barbara, that's not normal. Are you okay? Do you need help?" A lump formed in my throat. Their concern was touching, but also embarrassing. "Guys, really, it's fine. I'm used to it," I said, forcing a smile. "Who wants another drink?" As I busied myself in the kitchen, I could hear them whispering, their worry obvious. I blinked back tears, refusing to let them see how much my family's behavior had hurt me. After that disastrous housewarming, I buried myself in work again, determined to move forward. The months flew by, and slowly I turned my apartment into a home I could truly be proud of. Every piece of furniture, every splash of color on the walls was a reminder of my hard work and independence. One sunny Monday, I decided to treat myself to something I'd been saving for, a car. It wasn't flashy, just a reliable setting to get me where I needed to go. As I drove it home, a wave of pride washed over me. This car was mine, bought with my own money, a symbol of everything I had accomplished. I hadn't planned to tell my family, but news spread fast. That evening, my phone rang, and Michelle's cheerful voice came through the speaker. "Ratch, I heard you bought a car. That's nice," she said, though her tone made it clear she didn't mean it. "You know, you're really doing things the hard way. All this working and saving. It's so unnecessary." Her words made my stomach tighten. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Well," she said, as if explaining something obvious, "the main job of a woman is to marry properly. Find a man who will take care of you and give you everything you need. Why work yourself to death when you could have it all handed to you?" I was speechless for a moment. "Michelle, that's not how I see things. I want to earn what I have. I'm proud of what I've accomplished." She laughed, a light, tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. "Oh, Ratch, always the difficult one. Well, you'll see. I'll show you how it's done." Before I could respond, Michelle had hung up. I stared at the phone, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. How could we see life so differently? A few months later, I got my answer. Michelle called, her voice full of excitement. "Barbara, you'll never guess. I'm getting married. His name is Nicholas, and he's absolutely loaded. His parents are paying for everything. The wedding's going to be stunning." As she went on about the dresses, flowers, and guest list, I felt an emptiness inside me. This was what she had been working toward, her idea of success. The wedding day came faster than I expected. I stood in a grand hall, surrounded by glittering guests, feeling out of place. Michelle looked radiant in her designer gown, and our parents couldn't stop beaming with pride. I sipped champagne, trying to swallow the bitterness building inside me. Had my parents ever looked at me with such pride? Had they ever been this happy about anything I'd achieved? As the night went on, I felt more and more like a stranger. Michelle thrived in the spotlight, charming the guests and soaking up the attention. Our parents introduced themselves to everyone, proudly announcing, "We're the parents of the bride." On my way home, driving my modest car back to my modest apartment, I couldn't help but wonder if I had made the wrong choices. Was Michelle right? Had I chosen the harder path for nothing? But then I thought about my job, my achievements, and the pride I felt knowing I had earned everything on my own. No, I decided. My path might be harder, but it was mine. That made all the difference. After Michelle's wedding, life settled into a routine. Work kept me busy, but my mother's calls became irregular and unwelcome, interruption. Every conversation followed the same pattern. "Barbara, darling," Mom would start, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You won't believe what Michelle's been up to." I'd brace myself as she launched into another story about Michelle's fabulous life. "She's been invited to the most exclusive events. Can you believe it? Our Michelle rubbing elbows with high society. One day, after an especially exhausting call, I couldn't hold back any more. 'Mom, that's great for Michelle,' I said, frustration leaking into my voice. 'But don't you want to know what's going on in my life?' There was a pause. Then Mom said in a patronizing tone, 'Oh, honey, of course we care, but you really should learn from your sister. Be more glamorous. Why work so hard for so little when you could have it all?' A few weeks later, I received an invitation. Michelle and Nicholas were throwing a housewarming party for their new luxury apartment, a gift from his parents, naturally. The night of the party, I stood outside Michelle and Nicholas's building, feeling small. I smoothed down my simple dress, took a deep breath, and walked in. The apartment was breathtaking. Every surface sparkled, and every piece of furniture looked like it cost more than I made in a year. My parents were already there, marveling at every detail. Tried to stay in the background, but Michelle spotted me almost immediately. She walked over, holding a champagne flute, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. "Barbara, so glad you could make it," she said, her tone sweet but her gaze critical. "I hope you're taking notes. This is how a housewarming should be done. None of that plastic furniture and disposable dishes nonsense like at your place." My cheeks burned. "Michelle, that's—" But she didn't wait to hear the rest, already flitting off to dazzle other guests, leaving me standing there with the sting of her words. In the weeks that followed, Michelle seemed determined to flaunt her lifestyle at every turn. She bought the most expensive things, clothes, jewelry, you name it. Then came the car. One evening after work, a sleek sports car pulled up beside me. The window rolled down, and there was Michelle, her face smug. "Like it," she purred. "Just a little gift from Nicholas. Thought I'd take it for a spin." I glanced at my plain but dependable sedan. "It's very nice, Michelle." She followed my gaze and laughed. "Oh, Barbara, always settling for less. You'll always be working for others while I live the good life." Her words stung, but I didn't let her see it. 3 years passed in a blur of spreadsheets, meetings, and promotions as I climbed the corporate ladder. Meanwhile, Michelle seemed happy hopping from one shopping spree to another. Our lives couldn't have been more different, but I'd learned to accept it, or so I thought. Then, on an ordinary Saturday, everything changed. Mom called, her voice shaky. "Barbara, it's Michelle. She's back home. Nicholas left her. He said she's too shallow, too focused on spending his money. He called her stupid. Can you believe it? And she signed a prenup. She has nothing." A wave of emotions hit me. Shock, concern, and if I was honest, a tiny flicker of vindication. I quickly pushed that feeling aside, ashamed of myself. "I'm coming over," I said, already grabbing my keys. When I arrived at my parents' house, it felt like stepping into a war zone. I could hear Michelle screaming from the driveway. Inside, it was chaos. Michelle was in the living room, mascara streaked down her face, her designer clothes disheveled. She was throwing anything within reach, vases, picture frames, cushions. "He can't do this to me," she shrieked, her voice raw with anger and despair. "I'm Michelle. I'm beautiful. I'm perfect," she cried, her voice filled with rage and tears. Mom and Dad hovered around her, trying desperately to calm her down. "Sweetie, please," Mom pleaded. "We'll figure this out. Dad will buy you a new dress, won't you, dear?" Dad nodded quickly. "Of course, princess. Anything you want." I stood there, watching this strange scene unfold, feeling like I had stepped into an alternate reality. This couldn't be how life was supposed to work, could it? As the days passed, Michelle's tantrums didn't stop. She'd cry for hours, then scream, then demand expensive gifts to make herself feel better. And our parents, eager to keep her happy, gave her everything she asked for. One evening, after another meltdown, I couldn't hold back any more. "Maybe," I said carefully, "Michelle should consider getting a job. It might help her appreciate the value of money and give her something to focus on." The room fell silent. Then, all at once, chaos erupted. Michelle's face twisted in anger. "A job? Like you, slaving away every day like some peasant." She spat. Bursting into tears, she ran upstairs, slamming her door so hard the whole house shook. Before I could even process what had happened, Mom and Dad turned on me. "How dare you?" Mom hissed. "Your sister is going through a terrible time, and you suggest she lower herself to your levels." I didn't mean it like that. I tried to explain, but they weren't listening. "Get out. Dad said, his voice cold. "Get out of this house right now," Mom added, pointing at the door. "And don't come back until you can be supportive of your sister." In a daze, I grabbed my purse and left. When I walked into my apartment, my sanctuary, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Sadness at being rejected by my family, anger at their blindness to Michelle's faults, and oddly, a sense of relief. For the first time, I saw how toxic my family had been all these years. Life has a funny way of surprising you when you least expect it. Just days after the blow-up with my family, I got news that left me stunned. I had won a company contest. The prize, a 5-month, all-expenses-paid cruise around the world. In a moment of weakness, or maybe hope, I decided to call my parents. Maybe this good news could heal the rift between us. "Mom, Dad, you won't believe it. I won a cruise around the world." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then my mother's cold voice broke through. "Barbara, how can you be so selfish? Your sister is going through a terrible time, and you're bragging about vacations?" As though I had been slapped. I said softly, not flaunting anything. "I simply considered." Mom interrupted me, though. "If you had any decency, you would assign that ticket to Michelle," she remarked harshly. "She requires a change of environment. As usual, you can stay home and work." Something inside of me caught fire. Years of irritation burst all at once. "No," I responded with great force. "I was going on this trip. I obtained it. Michelle made poor decisions, so I am not giving it up. I'm traveling." The next several weeks passed in a haze as I prepared. I arranged everything at work, packed my luggage, and on the day of departure, I did something I had never done before. I turned off my cell phone. I felt free for the first time in many years. The cruise fulfilled all I had imagined. In Malta, I saw breathtaking sunsets. In Romania, I saw old ruins, and I strolled through Singapore's crowded streets. I was just Barbara for 4 amazing months, not the family failure or the responsible older sister. All good things, nevertheless, have to fade. Reality struck when the ship grounded back home. Turning on my phone, I expected a deluge of messages, but only a handful of my parents' missed calls. I headed home feeling lighter than I had in years. Heard sounds inside my apartment as I got closer. My pulse thumped. Had somebody broken in? With caution opening the door, she was there. Michelle. She was stretched on my couch, surrounded by empty takeout containers and shopping bags. "Michelle," said. I started to gasp. "What are you doing here?" She looked up, barely reacting to my sudden arrival. "Oh, you're back, finally." I stood frozen, my keys still in my hand. "How did you get in here?" She rolled her eyes. "Don't be dramatic, Barbara. I used the spare keys you left with Mom and Dad. I needed a change of scenery. Everything at home reminded me of, you know." I stared at her, speechless. This was too much. "I need air," I muttered, grabbing my car keys and heading outside. But when I got to the parking lot, my car was gone. Panic set in as I called my parents. Mom picked up, her voice overly cheerful. "Barbara, dear, how was your trip?" "Where's my car?" I cut straight to the point. There was a pause, and then Dad came on the line. "We sold it." The world seemed to spin. "You what?" Michelle needed cheering up. Mom said casually, as if it were no big deal. "We used the money to take her shopping and to the spa." What I was hearing defied belief. "That was my car. You had nowhere right," I yelled. Dad's voice then cut in, sharp and contemptuous. "Now, Barbara, we are a family. That is yours. Ours is what is. Do not act selfishly." I snapped something inside of me. Years of frustration, bitterness, and wrath spilled all at once. Selfish. You raided my house, stole my automobile, and I am selfish. I want my money taken back. Now, Their response was sharp and instantaneous. They branded me a letdown, unappreciative, heartless. Stung, but for the first time they did not break me. Completely blind to the tempest within me, I hung up the phone, marched back into my flat, and found Michelle still asleep on my couch. "Get out," I said softly but forcefully. Startled, Michelle turned to gaze up. "Wonderful. Exit, currently." She tried to argue, to dominate me as usual, but this time I moved nothing. For the first time, I started first. The next day I sued my parents for the worth of my car and paid a lawyer. Furious, they swore to disavow me and cut me from their will. I did not, nonetheless, back off. That matter came before the court. Laying years of financial abuse and emotional manipulation for strangers to hear was exhausting. Still, at least justice was done. My parents had to sell their house to pay for back-off since the judge determined in my favor, declaring to everyone who would listen that I was the villain who had destroyed their life. They moved into a modest apartment. Once more, though, their words did not reach me. New from the showroom, my new car made me lighter on the road. First in my life, I felt quite free, released from their expectations, under control and under manipulation. Chose grudgingly to cut off all contact with my family. The first few months were hard. One could sometimes be doubtful and lonely, but I began to live on my own terms gradually. At work, I gave it everything and moved quickly up the ladder. New individuals I encountered valued me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. I moved, developed new interests, and discovered enjoyment in everyday objects. Mostly, I came to enjoy me, to esteem my strength, will, and worth. I smile now as I sit in my office peering out over the city skyline. Though not easy, it was mine. I made this life step by step, decision after decision. I would not change anything.
This story is titled, "My Dad and Stepmom Try to Force Me Out of My Own House for My Pregnant Stepsister. When I refused, they changed the locks." Hi everyone, before we dive in, a quick favor. If you enjoy content like this, please hit the subscribe button. It's free, supports the channel, and make sure you never miss out on amazing videos. Alright, let's get started. Hey guys, I've been holding on to this for a while, and honestly, I still can't believe it all went down the way it did. Let me break it down for you. I'm a 28 male, single, living in the house my mom left me when she passed 5 years ago. It's a modest 3-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood. Not flashy, but it's comfortable. And most importantly, it's from my mom. She worked her whole life for this place. And when she was gone, she made sure I knew it was meant to give me stability. This house isn't just a roof over my head. It's her legacy. My mom was the only consistent parent I had growing up. She wasn't perfect, but she was always there when I needed her. My dad, on the other hand, checked out after the divorce. He remarried pretty quickly, and let's just say his priorities shifted. His new wife was always the center of his world, and her daughter, let's call her Savannah, was treated like royalty. Savannah's 25 now and pregnant. I don't have a problem with her being pregnant. That's not the issue. The problem is she's one of those people who just assumes the world owes her something. Her mom and my dad have been feeding that ego of hers since we were young. If Savannah wants something, she gets it. Doesn't matter if it's a new car, expensive vacations, or random crap she decides she wants. They bend over backward to keep her happy. Total, I want it, I got it attitude. I've kept my distance from all of that. I see my dad here and there, but I've made it clear that I like my space. The house is my sanctuary. It's where I can just live my life without anyone interfering. I've got a decent job, some good friends, and a pretty straightforward routine. I'm not rolling in cash, but I'm stable. That's more than a lot of people can say these days. For now, it's just me in the house. And honestly, I like it that way. No roommates, no drama, just peace and quiet. Exactly what I needed after my mom passed away. Now, back to Savannah. A few months ago, her boyfriend, some guy named Tyler, left her. Honestly, I could see it coming from a mile away. He always seemed like the type to bail when things got real. Savannah didn't seem too broken up about it, though. From what I heard, she went straight back to her mom and my dad, where she was immediately babied and spoiled all over again. They cooked for her, bought her maternity stuff, and basically treated her like she was made of glass. I didn't think much of it at first. That's their business, not mine. But then, out of nowhere, my dad calls me up and says he wants to talk. This isn't something he does often, so I figured it must be important. I head over to their place, and as soon as I walk in, I can tell something's up. My dad and his wife are sitting at the kitchen table, and Savannah's there too, rubbing her belly trying to remind everyone she's pregnant. They started off with some meaningless small talk, the kind where you know they're stalling. My dad asked how work was going, and his wife nodded along like she cared. But it didn't take long before they cut to the chase. My dad started saying Savannah needed a stable place to live because their house was too cramped with the baby coming. Before I could even respond, his wife jumped in, her tone sharp but coated in fake concern. "Well," she said, "since you're living alone in that big house and you're not married or anything, it just makes sense for Savannah to move in. She needs space for the baby, and you're not exactly tied down to anything serious. You could easily find something smaller and more practical for yourself." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a declaration, like they'd already decided this was the plan, and I just needed to fall in line. My dad chimed in, saying they'd even looked into some apartments for me, as if doing the research made their demand more reasonable. I couldn't believe it. They were clearly throwing hints, screaming that my life didn't matter, like my house. My house was just a spare room they could shuffle people into when it suited them. The entitlement was overwhelming, as if being unmarried or childless meant I wasn't really using my life or my home the right way. At first, I thought I must have misheard them. I mean, who says something like that? But no, they were damn serious. Apparently, they'd been planning this for a while, just waiting for the right time to bring it up. I told them straightforward, no, obviously. This house isn't just a piece of property to me. It's my home, and it's one of the last connections I have to my mom. The idea of giving it up, especially for someone like Savannah, was just absurd. I tried to explain that, but they weren't hearing it. They kept going on about how family helps family, and how I don't really need all that space since I don't have a family of my own. It was like talking to a wall. No matter what I said, they just kept pushing. Savannah barely said anything during the conversation, but the smug look on her face said it all. She was confident they'd wear me down and get what they wanted. That's how it's always been with her. She's used to people caving in and giving her exactly what she wants. At one point, I turned to her and asked, "Savannah, do you really want to sit in my apartment? I mean, seriously? This is my home, my space. Why don't you take one of those apartments you guys so helpfully looked up? You've already done the legwork. Why is it suddenly ridiculous for you to use those options but okay to take mine?" She just blinked at me, like the concept of her being the one to compromise was completely foreign. Her mom jumped in with her sugar-coated voice saying, "Oh, honey, you don't understand. Savannah needs stability. An apartment won't provide the same comfort and space for her and the baby." I laughed bitterly. "So my stability doesn't matter? My comfort doesn't count? You guys are unbelievable. You walk in here, demanding I uproot my entire life for Savannah's sake, and you expect me to just roll over and say yes?" Savannah didn't flinch, just sat there with her arms crossed, that smug look plastered on her face like she'd already won. She wasn't even trying to engage, leaving her mom and my dad to do all the dirty work for her. It was obvious she didn't think she needed to explain herself. In her mind, it wasn't a request. It was an inevitable outcome. Her mom jumped in, her voice sharp and condescending. "It's not about your comfort. This is about what's best for the family. Savannah is bringing a new life into this world. Don't you think that's a little more important than your need for space? You're a grown man. You don't need a big house all to yourself. It's selfish to hold on to something that could give her and the baby a better start in life." I stared at her, stunned by the sheer audacity. Selfish? Are you serious right now? You think I'm selfish for keeping what my mom left me? This isn't just some space I'm clinging to. This is my home. This is where I've built my life. And you're sitting here telling me I should just hand it over like it's nothing? My dad sighed, clearly frustrated, and decided to jump in. "We're not asking you to give it up forever," he said, as if that somehow made it better. "Just think of it as helping Savannah get back on her feet. Once she's stable, maybe she can move out, and you can figure out something else for yourself. We're just trying to do what's best for everyone." "For everyone?" I snapped. "No, you're trying to do what's best for her. Let's not pretend this is about the family or doing what's right. This is about you bending over backward for Savannah, like you always do, and expecting me to clean up the mess. Guess what? I'm not playing along." Savannah's mom narrowed her eyes. "It's called being part of a family. Sometimes you have to make sacrifices for the greater good. If your mother were here, she'd—" "Don't," I interrupted, my voice cold. "Don't you dare bring my mom into this. She left this house to me because she trusted me to take care of it. She knew exactly how you'd behave, and that's why none of you are even mentioned in her will. So don't sit here and tell me what she would have wanted, because you have no idea." They didn't say anything to that. My dad looked uncomfortable and went to do something else. Savannah just sat there, arms crossed, with that same smug expression. It was clear she thought I'd give in eventually. She didn't even try to argue or defend herself. Just let her mom and my dad do all the talking, like she was above having to justify this ridiculous demand. To her, it wasn't a negotiation. It was just a matter of when, not if, they'd get their way. But this time, they were messing with the wrong person. This house isn't up for negotiation. My mom trusted me with it, and I'm not about to let them guilt me into giving it up. Still, I could tell this wasn't the end of it. They left the conversation open-ended, like they were expecting me to change my mind, but I didn't. Although I thought maybe they'd cool off and realize how ridiculous the whole thing was after I explicitly said no in their faces. But it was just the beginning. My dad and his wife seemed to think persistence was the key. Like if they kept bringing it up, I'd eventually cave. It started with small, passive-aggressive comments. My dad would call and casually ask if I'd thought more about helping out. His wife texted me articles about the importance of supporting single mothers, as if I'd suddenly feel enlightened and offer up my home. Savannah stayed quiet for the most part, but I could tell she was confident her mom and my dad would handle everything for her. Then they upped the ante. They started showing up unannounced. It wasn't like they were coming over to visit, though. Every time they came, they'd find some excuse to bring the conversation back to Savannah and her needs. One time, my dad showed up with a box of baby clothes for storage. He walked in like it was the most normal thing in the world and asked where he could put it. I told him he could take it back to his house. He gave me this look like I'd just insulted him. "It's just temporary," he said. "You're not even using the guest room." I told him the guest room wasn't for storage. It was for guests. He grumbled but eventually took the box back to his car. That set the tone for every interaction after that. They'd bring up some solution that involved me giving up my space, and I'd shut it down. The thing is, I could tell they didn't see me as the actual owner of the house. To them, it was just a convenient resource they could use however they wanted. My mom left it to me, but they acted like it was still up for grabs, like I'd just been holding it for Savannah until she needed it. What really pissed me off was how they framed everything as if I was the selfish one. They made it sound like I was just sitting on this treasure trove of space and refusing to share it out of spite. It wasn't enough that I said no. I had to justify my decision over and over again to people who didn't want to hear it. Things escalated when Savannah decided to insert herself into the situation more aggressively. One afternoon, she rolled up to my house, popped her trunk, and casually asked me to help her unload a stroller. I stared at her like she'd lost her mind, and asked why she was bringing a stroller to my house. Well, where else am I supposed to put it? I don't have the room right now. She said I was trying to process the sheer audacity of her statement. Not my problem, I replied, already feeling the frustration building. That, of course, triggered her. She launched into this self-centered rant about how I was making things so much harder for everyone, as if I'd personally created her problems. Family is supposed to stick together, she said, as though that somehow justified dumping her issues on me. She continued, "You don't understand how stressful it is to be in my position. You've got no idea what it's like to have a baby on the way," she added, with this tone that suggested I was some clueless idiot who couldn't possibly comprehend real life. She was right about one thing. I don't know what it's like to be pregnant, but what I do know is what it's like to have responsibilities. And unlike her, I've been handling mine without expecting anyone to swoop in and fix everything for me. More importantly, I don't demand sitting in other people's houses just because I don't have enough space. So I told her, point blank, "Your problems aren't mine to solve, and I'm not about to turn my life upside down just because you refuse to figure out yours." That did not go over well. Her face twisted into this look of pure hatred, like I just told her the world didn't revolve around her, which, let's be real, I basically did. She stormed off in a huff, but not before throwing one last gem over her shoulder. "You're going to regret this someday." The irony of her whole tantrum wasn't lost on me. She'd spent her entire life being coddled and catered to, and now, for the first time, someone wasn't bending to her will. Instead of realizing how absurd her demands were, she acted like I was the one being unreasonable. Bringing a stroller to my house, assuming she'd just park herself and her baby here, was the most ridiculous thing I'd ever seen. It was like she genuinely believed my house was already hers, and I was just an obstacle to be removed. It didn't stop there. They just kept pushing my limits. The other day, my dad came over with a realtor. He didn't even tell me he was coming. I was sitting in my living room when I heard the knock on the door. I opened it to find him standing there with a woman holding a clipboard. "I thought we could look at some options for you," he said. I didn't even let them inside. I told them to leave and slammed the door. That was the last straw for me. It was clear they weren't going to stop until I did something drastic. At that point, I knew I couldn't trust them anymore. It wasn't just about the house, it was about the principle. They thought they could bully me into submission because that's how things had always worked with Savannah. But I'm not Savannah, and I don't roll over for anyone. That night, I called a security company and arranged for cameras to be installed around my property. It wasn't a huge move, but it was a step toward protecting what was mine. I wanted to be prepared for whatever ridiculous stunt they might try next. I truly didn't feel safe anymore, dreading the house could be taken from me, or they might come up with any nonsense idea to get me kicked out of the house legally. I knew damn sure that they weren't going to stop until they hit a wall they couldn't climb over. So, I made it my mission to be that wall. I wasn't going to play their games anymore, and I wasn't going to entertain any more conversations about how I should just hand over my house. And just like I expected, they came up with a new, even more creative idea. I came home from work one evening, tired but relieved to finally be back at my sanctuary. Except when I tried to insert my key into the lock, it wouldn't fit. At first, I thought I must have grabbed the wrong key, but after a few more tries, it hit me. The locks had been changed. My heart sank, and a wave of rage surged through me as I noticed a folded piece of paper taped to the door. The note read, "We've changed the locks for safety. Please contact us to discuss this." It was signed by my dad. The audacity was almost laughable. I didn't waste a second. I pulled out my phone and called my dad. He picked up after a few rings, his tone casual, like this wasn't the most insane thing he'd ever done. "What the hell is going on?" I said, barely able to keep my voice steady. "Why are the locks on my house changed?" "It's temporary," he said, like that somehow made it better. "We were just trying to help Savannah. You've been so resistant, and we thought maybe this would be the easiest way to make things smoother for everyone." "For everyone?" I snapped. "You mean for you and Savannah? You've crossed every line imaginable. This is trespassing, and if you think I'm just going to let this slide, you're insane." His tone shifted immediately and started begging me not to. "Don't call the cops. Please, don't escalate this. It'll look bad for the family." "Look bad for the family? You think that's my concern right now?" I shot back. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to get whoever changed those locks to fix this immediately, or I will call the cops, and I'll press charges for trespassing and attempted theft." There was a pause, and for a moment, I thought he might actually try to argue with me, but he must have realized I wasn't bluffing, because his tone softened further. "Okay, fine. We'll fix it. But you're being so unreasonable. We're just trying to do what's best for Savannah and the baby. You know this is a temporary solution." I ignored his attempt to guilt me. "You have until the end of the day to fix this, or the police will be involved. That's not negotiable." After some more muttering and weak protests, he finally agreed. I hung up without another word, my hands shaking with anger. This wasn't just another overreach. This was a direct, calculated move to take what wasn't theirs. It was a blatant violation of my home, my boundaries, and my trust. A few hours later, the locksmith returned, and the locks were changed back. My dad didn't show his face, and neither did Savannah or her mom. I stood by the door the entire time, watching every move, ensuring nothing was left undone. Once everything was back to normal, I sat down in my living room, staring at the walls of the house that had become my battlefield. This wasn't just another attempt to guilt me or push my limits. This was a declaration of war. I knew then that things weren't going to de-escalate on their own. If they were willing to go this far, there was no telling what they'd try next. But if they thought I was just going to roll over and let them have their way, they were in for a rude awakening. That night, I stayed up late going through paperwork and making calls. I wanted to make sure there was no way they could pull something like that again. But what really got to me was how they acted like this was normal. They genuinely thought they were entitled to my house. It didn't matter that my mom had left it to me, or that I'd been living there for years. To them, it was just a house, something they could take if they wanted it badly enough. I started moving towards taking legal actions. When I sat down with my lawyer and told him about everything, how my dad and stepmom had been pressuring me nonstop, how they'd gone as far as changing the locks on my house, he listened carefully, asking pointed questions about the house, my mom's will, and any unusual behavior from my dad in recent months. At first, I thought he was just being thorough, but then he leaned back in his chair and said, "I need to tell you something. Your dad has already inquired about contesting your mom's will." I was confused. "What do you mean? Contesting it? When?" "Months ago," he explained. "He didn't file anything officially, but he did consult with a lawyer about the possibility of claiming the house as family property instead of your inheritance. From what I gather, he was looking for any loophole he could use to gain control of the house." I sat there, stunned. All this time, while pretending to be on my side or at least trying to keep the peace, my dad had been plotting to take the house out from under me. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment idea cooked up by my stepmom. They'd been planning it for months, long before they even started pressuring me to move out. "He doesn't have a strong case," my lawyer added quickly, probably noticing the panic on my face. "Your mom's will is airtight, and the house was explicitly left to you." But the fact that he even considered it says a lot about his intentions. It wasn't just betrayal, it was premeditated. My dad had been looking for ways to take what my mom left me while pretending to care about my well-being. The manipulation, the constant guilt trips, the emotional blackmail, it all made sense now. This wasn't about Savannah needing a place to stay. It was about them trying to take something they had no right to. Hearing this made my frustration boil over. This isn't just about standing up for myself anymore. It's about protecting what my mom worked her whole life to give me. Every move they make feels like a slap in the face to her memory, and I can't let that slide. No matter how relentless or outrageous they get, I'm not backing down. This house is mine, and they're not taking it. I'll let you guys know what happens next. Update 1. Hey everyone. I thought I would give you an update once I figure out what to do. So here we go. So, after everything I'd learned from my lawyer, I spent the rest of that night replaying every interaction with my dad over the past few months. I couldn't keep avoiding him and proceed legally. I had to directly tell him that I know what he's been planning for. So, I confronted him. I didn't bother calling or texting. I showed up at his house unannounced, just like he and his wife had done to me so many times before. When he opened the door, he looked surprised, caught off guard, but there wasn't even a flicker of guilt on his face. That was the part that stung the most. He acted like he had nothing to feel ashamed about. I need to know why you've been looking into contesting Mom's will, I said, cutting straight to the point. His face twisted into a mix of confusion and defensiveness. What are you talking about? He asked, feigning ignorance. I don't know where you're getting this idea, but it's not true. Don't lie to me, I shot back. I already know you spoke to a lawyer about it months ago, so let's hear it. What were you planning to do? It's not like that, he insisted, stumbling over his words. I wasn't trying to take anything. I just wanted to see if there were options for the family. For the family? I repeated, my voice sharp with disbelief. Let's be real. It's not about the family, it's about Savannah. Don't stand here and pretend this is about anything else. You were planning to take the one thing Mom left me, and you think that's okay? I wasn't planning anything, he snapped. I was just considering possibilities. That house is too big for you anyway. And Savannah, she's in a tough spot. She needs a stable home for the baby. And that means stealing mine? I countered, my frustration boiling over. You didn't even ask for my help. You went behind my back, tried to manipulate me, and now you're acting like you're doing me some kind of favor? It wasn't like that, he repeated weakly, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. He looked everywhere but at me, the way he always did when he didn't want to admit he was wrong. I stood there for a moment, waiting to see if he'd say something that might justify any of this. He didn't. I shook my head and turned to leave. There was no point in arguing with someone who couldn't even own up to their actions. That conversation cemented everything I already knew. I couldn't trust him. He wasn't acting like a father. He was acting like someone who thought my life, my home, and my choices were his to control, because it fit his own narrative. Back at home, I called my lawyer to discuss what to do next. He reassured me that my mom's will was rock solid, and that my dad didn't have a legal leg to stand on. Still, it was clear this wasn't just about legalities, it was about wearing me down. They were trying to make me feel like the fight wasn't worth it, like it would be easier to just give in and let them have their way. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, emails, and constant vigilance. I filed paperwork to ensure the house was fully secured in my name, with no loopholes they could exploit. I upgraded my security system, added more cameras, and even reached out to a title protection service to keep an eye out for any shady activity. It felt like I was fortifying a castle against invaders, and honestly, that's exactly what it was. Savannah, meanwhile, doubled down on her tactics. She started posting cryptic messages on social media about being abandoned by family and having to fight for what's right. She didn't name me directly, but it was obvious who she was talking about. Mutual acquaintances started reaching out, asking what was going on and if there was any way to smooth things over. I kept my responses short and factual. I wasn't interested in playing her game or airing my side of the story to the world. But as the weeks went on, their efforts started to falter. The legal fees were piling up on their end, and my lawyer assured me they'd run out of options soon. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. People like them don't just give up. They regroup, find new angles, and come back when you least expect it. By the time everything finally settled down, I was absolutely drained. Fighting for my home, my peace, and my boundaries took everything I had, but it was worth it. This wasn't just about a house. It was about standing up for myself and refusing to let anyone walk all over me. My dad and Savannah thought they could guilt me into submission, but they were so wrong. If anything, this whole ordeal just opened my eyes to how far they'd go to manipulate me. Honestly, I'm starting to think cutting ties might be the only way to truly move forward. For now, things are quiet, but I'm not naive. If they try pulling any stunts again, I'll be ready. If anything changes, I might just come back with an update. Thanks for sticking around and hearing me out. If you've got any advice or just some solidarity to share, I'd love to hear it. Final update. Hey guys, I wanted to give you an update on everything that's happened since the last time I shared. It's been a wild ride, but I finally feel like I'm coming out on the other side of all this madness. I'm still in my house, thankfully, and it's staying that way. Let me break it down for you. After they tried every possible way to drag me out of the house, they backed off for a while. Weeks turned into months, and things went eerily quiet. No calls, no texts, and no random visits from Savannah or her mom. It felt strange, almost like they were regrouping, but I wasn't going to complain about the peace. During that time, Savannah had her baby, a healthy little boy from what I heard through the grapevine. I figured maybe they were too busy with the baby to keep bothering me, or maybe they'd finally given up. It was late one evening when I heard the knock. I checked my security cameras, and there they were. My dad, his wife, and Savannah, all standing there like they were about to stage an intervention. I debated ignoring them, but I decided to open the door, mostly because I wanted to hear what excuse they'd come up with this time. The second I opened the door, my dad's wife started in with her usual nonsense. She said they'd been thinking about everything that had happened and wanted to move forward as a family. She talked about letting bygones be bygones and said they were giving me one last chance to make things right. Then Savannah spoke up, holding her baby like a prop. She went on about how hard things had been for her, how she wanted her child to grow up surrounded by family, and how she still believed I could do the right thing if I just opened my heart. It was the same manipulative garbage they'd been spouting for months, but now they were wrapping it up in a prettier package. My dad, ever the mediator, tried to play the let's all just get along card. He talked about how family is more important than material things, and how I needed to look at the bigger picture. I let them talk for a while, mostly out of morbid curiosity. When they finally stopped, I took a deep breath and laid it all out. "This is my house," I said, as calmly as I could manage. "It was left to me by my mom, and I'm not giving it up. I've told you this before, and I'm telling you again, the answer is no. I don't care what kind of speech you've rehearsed or how you're trying to spin this. You're not getting the house, and that's final." That should have been the end of it, but of course it wasn't. Savannah's mom immediately launched into accusations, shouting about how selfish I was, claiming I was putting material things over family, and failing to fulfill my so-called duty. She threw out every argument she could think of, trying to frame me as the villain in this whole situation. Savannah jumped in next, following the same script as always. She cried about how hard I was making her life, and how she couldn't believe I would abandon her and the baby in their time of need. She threw out the classic line that I'd regret this one day, as if I'd somehow look back and wish I'd let them walk all over me. My dad didn't say much at first, but the silence spoke louder than anything. He stood there, watching the whole thing unfold, not even attempting to mediate or diffuse the situation. It was clear he didn't know what to say anymore, and maybe a small part of him realized just how far this had gone. I wasn't in the mood to argue. They'd crossed every line already, and I wasn't about to let them pull me into another pointless shouting match. "You've already crossed every boundary I have," I said. "You've lied, manipulated, and tried to steal what's mine. And now you're back here, acting like you're the victims. I'm done with this. Get off my property." But unsurprisingly, they didn't leave. Savannah's mom kept going, insisting that I was being unreasonable and trying to guilt me into backing down. Savannah chimed in here and there, adding little comments about how families should support each other and how I was heartless for not stepping up. My dad finally spoke, but all he could manage was another weak plea for me to be reasonable and see things from their perspective. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Instead, I turned around, walked back into the house, and locked the door behind me. I'd already decided I wasn't playing their games anymore. If they wanted to keep pushing, they could deal with the consequences. Once inside, I called the police. I wasn't bluffing, and I wasn't going to let them think I was. When I explained the situation, the dispatcher assured me an officer would be sent out shortly. I waited by the window, watching as they lingered in my driveway, still talking amongst themselves. By the time the police arrived, they had moved off the porch, but weren't making any effort to leave. The officers spoke with them for a few minutes, clearly laying down the law. From what I could see, the cops weren't buying into their excuses or justifications. They told them, in no uncertain terms, to leave and not come back. Watching them finally leave under police supervision felt like a small victory, but it also came with a sense of finality. Whatever shred of a relationship I had left with my dad was gone. As I sat down to collect my thoughts, I realized just how exhausted I was. They'd taken so much out of me, not just time and energy, but also the sense of security I'd felt in my own home. Still, I knew I'd made the right choice. Setting boundaries with people like that wasn't just necessary, it was survival. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't just done with the house drama, I was done with them altogether. I blocked their numbers, unfollowed them on social media, and made it clear to mutual acquaintances that I didn't want updates or messages passed along. Cutting ties was hard at first, but when I looked back at everything they'd done, I realized there was nothing left to salvage. They didn't care about me or my boundaries, they only cared about what I could give them. Instead of having a toxic family, I leaned on my friends more. They'd been there for me through all the chaos, reminding me that I wasn't crazy for standing my ground. One of them suggested I throw a housewarming party, not because the house was new, but because I'd fought so hard to keep it. The idea made me laugh, but it also felt fitting. The party was small, just a handful of close friends, but it was perfect. For the first time in a long time, I felt genuinely happy. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. Looking back on everything, I'm proud of the way I handled it. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I wanted to give up, but I didn't. I stood my ground, and I proved to myself that I'm stronger than I ever thought I could be. This house is more than just a place to live. It's a reminder of everything I've fought for. It's a symbol of my independence, my resilience, and my ability to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that family isn't about blood. It's about respect, trust, and mutual support. And if someone isn't willing to give you those things, they don't deserve a place in your life, no matter who they are. So, to anyone out there who's facing something similar, stand your ground, set your boundaries, and don't let anyone guilt you into crossing them. You don't owe anyone your peace, your stability, or your happiness. I've moved on from all of this now. I still live in my house, and every time I walk through the door, I'm reminded of what I've overcome. It's not just a house, it's home. And I'm not letting anyone take that away from me. Thank you guys for reading.
On my wedding day, my fiancé forced me to wear his mother's 15-year-old dress. When I refused, he slapped me hard, and I fell to the floor, with his mother watching and controlling every move. She had the audacity to say, "How dare you defy me?" That was the last straw. I left the event and sought revenge. Within 24 hours, they were both behind bars. My name is Nancy Carter, and I'm 27 years old. I grew up in Atlantic City, New Jersey, where everything seemed pretty normal until it wasn't. I met Jacob Walker 5 years ago, and it felt like fate. He was charming, attentive, and we just clicked. At first, I thought he was the person I was meant to spend the rest of my life with. He felt like home. We had so many dreams together. Our relationship was perfect, or at least I thought it was. In May 2023, after almost 5 years of being together, Jacob proposed. It was one of the happiest moments of my life. I never imagined my engagement would be the start of something beautiful, a new chapter filled with love and family. We were planning to get married in June 2024, and I couldn't wait to start this next chapter. But things started changing even before the wedding planning began. At first, I thought I was just being overly excited, but Jacob became more and more distant. I was so caught up in the idea of the wedding, picking out the dress, choosing colors, and planning the entire event, but Jacob didn't seem to care. He was always busy, always distracted. Every time I showed him pictures or asked for his opinion, he just responded with a quick, "looks good," or sent a thumbs-up emoji. That was it. His indifference was more than just a lack of interest in the wedding. It felt like he was pulling away from me in every way. But what made it worse was his mother, Margaret. I didn't notice it at first. I thought it was sweet how close they were. She would call him multiple times a day, asking for his thoughts on everything, from what he should have for lunch to bigger life decisions. I remember thinking it was a bit much, but I didn't mind. I figured it was just a part of who he was, that he was a mama's boy, and that was fine. But as the months passed, I began to see the cracks in our relationship, and I started feeling like I was competing with her for his attention. I should have known something was wrong when I showed him my wedding dress. I had spent hours choosing it. Perfectly elegant, classic, the one I had dreamed of for so long. I was so excited to share the moment with him. I sent him a picture, hoping he would be as excited as I was, but his response was underwhelming. "It looks beautiful," he texted. That was all. But what I didn't know was that he had immediately sent the photo to his mother, and that's when everything began to fall apart. The next day, I received a call from Jacob, telling me that his mother had seen the dress and was very upset. I couldn't understand why. Margaret wanted me to wear her wedding dress, the one she had worn 15 years ago. She insisted it was tradition, that it was important to her. I was stunned. I had never agreed to wear her dress, never promised to do that. I had only made a passing comment years ago about how beautiful it was, but that didn't mean I was bound to it. When I tried to talk to Jacob about it, he didn't take my side. He acted like it wasn't a big deal, saying, "Mom's just upset, Nancy. Can't you make her happy?" I was so hurt. Why was I the one who had to sacrifice my happiness for his mother's? He said he just wanted to avoid conflict, but I wasn't the one causing the conflict. Margaret was. What really got to me was that Jacob didn't even stand up for me. He didn't defend my choice to wear the dress I loved. Instead, he acted like it was just another thing I was being unreasonable about. He was so concerned with keeping the peace with his mother that he completely disregarded my feelings. I kept telling myself that once we got married, everything would change. I convinced myself it was just a phase, that maybe he was just under pressure. But I was wrong. The wedding day was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. I had been waiting for this moment for so long. I had spent so many hours planning, from the venue to the flowers, the music, and everything in between. But as I stood in front of the mirror in my beautiful gown, ready to start my day, Jacob walked in holding Margaret's old dress. His face was serious, his tone firm. "Darling, you'll wear this dress today," he said, his voice cold. I was in shock. I couldn't believe it. He was telling me to wear her dress, not mine. The one I had chosen, the one I had dreamed about. The dress I had spent months picking out. I felt humiliated, but I also felt betrayed. "This is what my mother wants," he added, as if that made it okay. I couldn't believe my ears. I was crushed. I tried to explain, tried to reason with him. "Jacob, this isn't what I want. I've spent so much time picking out my dress, and it's what I feel beautiful in. Please understand." But he didn't listen. Then came the moment that changed everything. His expression darkened, and before I could say anything else, he slapped me, hard, across my face. I was stunned. The shock of it sent me crashing to the floor. His mother was watching, standing there, her face cold and triumphant. She had won. She was in control. I couldn't believe what had just happened. Jacob, the man I had loved for so long, the man I had trusted, had just struck me in front of his mother. The slap was painful, yes, but the emotional hurt was even worse. I felt so small, so insignificant. I had spent so many years believing in him, in us, and in that moment, it all came crashing down. Margaret's voice echoed in the room, her tone cold and calculated. "If you don't obey my orders, you cannot marry my son." That was it. That was the moment I knew it was over. I was done. Without saying another word, I turned around and walked out. I couldn't be in that house, that relationship, any longer. I had to leave. There was nothing left for me there. My life had become a lie. As I walked out the door, my heart shattered into a million pieces. I had lost everything I thought I had, but I knew one thing. I had to protect myself. I couldn't stay in that toxic environment, and I couldn't let Jacob and his mother get away with what they had done. The betrayal was too deep. That was the beginning of my journey to reclaim my life, but I didn't know just how far I would have to go to get the justice I deserved. The next steps would be painful, but I wasn't going to let them win. Not this time. I walked out of that house with nothing but the clothes on my back, my heart racing and my mind in turmoil. I couldn't understand how it had all gone so wrong. Jacob had never been like this before. Yes, he had always been close to his mother, but I thought that was just a part of who he was. I never imagined it would come to this. But as I stood outside, shaking, the reality hit me. This wasn't just a bad day. It was the end of everything I had believed in. I called my brother, Michael, the only person who had always supported me no matter what. He answered on the first ring, and I could hear the worry in his voice. "Nancy? Where are you? What happened?" I was barely holding myself together. "Michael, I need you." I left. I had to leave. Within minutes, Michael was at my side. His face showed a mix of anger and concern, but he didn't say anything. He just wrapped his arms around me, offering the only thing he could, his support. You did the right thing, Em. No one should ever make you feel like that. I stayed with him that night. I didn't want to be alone. I was broken, devastated, and full of questions. What had happened to Jacob? What had happened to the man I loved? But I couldn't let myself stay in that place of hurt forever. I wasn't going to let Jacob or his mother control me anymore. I had to do something that would make them understand that I wasn't a doormat, that I wasn't someone they could trample over. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about everything that had happened, the slap, the humiliation. I kept thinking about how Margaret had orchestrated the entire thing. She wasn't just controlling Jacob, she was controlling everything around her, including me. I had been nothing but a pawn in their sick little game, and I couldn't let it go. I had to make them pay. But I wasn't going to make it easy for them. I was going to take control back. The first thing I did was take a deep breath and gather my thoughts. I didn't want to act out of anger, though I was angry, so angry that I couldn't think straight. I needed to be strategic. I needed to expose the truth. And that's exactly what I did. I wrote an anonymous email detailing everything. Everything. I described how Jacob had allowed his mother to manipulate me, how he had hidden the truth about his mother's demands, and how he had slapped me on our wedding day just because I wouldn't comply with his mother's wishes. I didn't hold back. I made sure to emphasize how toxic their relationship was, how unhealthy it was for me to have been caught in the middle of it. I sent the email to everyone I could, friends, family, people I knew had been close to Jacob. I made sure they understood exactly what kind of man he was and what kind of influence his mother had over him. I wanted them to see the truth, to see the side of Jacob that I had seen, the side of him that had been hidden behind his charming facade. But that wasn't enough. I needed to make sure they didn't get away with it. I had discovered something during our relationship that I hadn't paid much attention to at the time. Jacob was involved in some shady business deals, illegal import-export activities that I had stumbled upon one night when I was going through his things. I had kept quiet about it, thinking it wasn't my place, but now it was my weapon. I couldn't let him keep getting away with it, not after what he had done to me. I contacted the authorities and anonymously tipped them off about Jacob's involvement in the illegal activities. I gave them the evidence I had, everything I knew, and let them take it from there. It felt empowering. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing something right, something that would finally bring justice. The next few days were a blur. I spent my time processing everything, talking to Michael, and trying to piece together the parts of my life that had been shattered. I knew Jacob and his mother would try to fight back, but I wasn't afraid. I wasn't going to let them win. I had already lost so much, but I was determined not to lose myself. Meanwhile, the email I sent had caused a stir. People began to talk. Jacob's friends, his family, they started to question him, to wonder what kind of person he had become. The truth was out there now, and no matter how hard Jacob tried to defend himself, the damage had been done. I wasn't the only one who knew about his mother's control over him. Everyone was starting to see it. As for Margaret, I could only imagine the chaos she must have been causing behind the scenes. She must have been furious. But I didn't care. I wasn't afraid of her anymore. I had to protect myself. I had to show the world that I was strong, that I wouldn't let her or Jacob dictate my life anymore. The police investigation into Jacob's illegal activities moved quickly. Within a few weeks, both Jacob and his mother were arrested. The charges against them were serious, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. They had tried to break me, to control me, but I had fought back. And in the end, I had won. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice, and it was about reclaiming my life. I had been manipulated for so long, but now I was free. I had taken back my power, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it from me again. The days after Jacob and Margaret's arrest were a strange mix of relief and disbelief. On one hand, I couldn't believe that everything had finally come to an end, but on the other hand, it felt almost surreal to know that the people who had hurt me so deeply were finally facing the consequences of their actions. The moment I heard the news that Jacob and his mother were both behind bars, a wave of emotions washed over me. I felt anger, but it wasn't the furious kind of anger that had consumed me right after the wedding. It was the kind of anger that came from years of being manipulated, of being forced into a corner, and of realizing how much time I had wasted. I had let them control me for so long, but now I was free. I didn't celebrate their downfall, but there was a sense of closure in knowing they could no longer hurt me, no longer hold any power over me. It wasn't about getting revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming the life I deserved. I was done being a pawn in their twisted game. But even though the legal battle was over, the emotional toll it had taken on me wasn't something I could just erase. I was still processing everything that had happened, trying to make sense of how I had let myself get so deep into a relationship with someone who had no respect for me. I thought I had known Jacob, but I had only seen the version of him that he wanted me to see. The real Jacob, the one who let his mother control every aspect of his life, was someone I never wanted to know. I took time for myself after everything went down. I stayed with Michael for a while longer, just trying to heal and find my footing again. I wasn't ready to dive back into the world, not yet. I needed space, time to breathe, and figure out who I was without Jacob. I had to remind myself that I was more than just his fiancé, more than just someone who had been manipulated by his mother. I had to rediscover who I was, what I wanted, and what I deserved. During this time, I also started going to therapy. At first, I wasn't sure it would help. I didn't want to talk about what had happened, didn't want to dig through all the pain and betrayal. But as I began to unpack my emotions, I realized how much I had ignored over the years. I had made so many compromises for Jacob, put aside my own happiness, and neglected my own needs. I had allowed his mother to dictate our relationship, and I had let Jacob walk all over me without standing up for myself. Therapy gave me the tools to understand why I had let it happen, and more importantly, how I could avoid repeating the same mistakes in the future. I also started focusing on rebuilding my life. I went back to the hobbies I had put aside for so long, things I loved but had sacrificed for the relationship. I spent more time with friends, the ones who had supported me through everything, and I reconnected with my family. Michael, especially, was my rock. He had been there every step of the way, and his unwavering support meant the world to me. But even as I started to heal, there were moments when I would feel the weight of everything that had happened. The emotional scars didn't disappear overnight, and the pain still lingered. I kept thinking about the woman I was before Jacob, the one who had been full of dreams and hope. I had lost that version of myself for a while, but now I was starting to find her again. One of the hardest things to accept was that I had to let go of the idea of what my life could have been. I had imagined a future with Jacob, one filled with love, family, and shared dreams. But that future had been built on lies and manipulation. And as painful as it was, I had to let go of it in order to move forward. It was the only way I could truly heal. Despite everything, I felt stronger now. The woman I was becoming was more self-aware, more resilient, and more in control of her own destiny. I had learned to trust myself again, and I wasn't going to settle for anything less than what I deserved. Jacob and his mother had tried to destroy me, but in the end, I had found my way back to myself. And so I moved forward not with anger, but with strength. They had lost their hold on me, and I was ready to embrace the future, whatever it held. I wasn't going to let anyone, especially not someone like Jacob, take away my happiness again. As the weeks passed, I began to feel a sense of peace settling over me. It wasn't immediate and it wasn't perfect, but it was real. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally living for myself, not for anyone else. The heavy burden of trying to please Jacob and his controlling mother was gone, and I could finally breathe again. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about living. I started doing things for myself, things I had neglected for so long. I enrolled in an art class that I had always wanted to take, but had put off. I started hiking in the nearby woods, something I used to love but had given up to accommodate Jacob's busy schedule. I reconnected with old friends who had drifted away during my time with him, and I found that they were still there for me, still supporting me in ways that meant more than I could ever explain. But there were moments when I would still feel a pang of sadness. The life I had imagined with Jacob, the weddings, the family, the future, was no longer possible. It was gone. And as much as I had moved on, those moments of loss still crept up on me, especially when I saw happy couples or when I'd hear his name mentioned. I couldn't help but feel that ache in my chest. But I also realized that the pain was a reminder of how far I had come, how much I had grown. One day, I received a letter. It was from Jacob's father, a man I had never really known. I had met him a few times during family gatherings, but he was always distant, never fully involved. I hadn't expected anything from him. But the letter he sent was unexpected. It wasn't a plea to take Jacob back or to forgive him. Instead, it was an apology. He acknowledged the pain his son had caused me and expressed his regret for not being more present to stop the toxic relationship that had developed between Jacob and his mother. I read that letter over and over, and for the first time since everything had happened, I felt a small sense of closure. It wasn't from Jacob, and it wasn't what I had hoped for, but it was something. It was an acknowledgement that the abuse I had suffered hadn't been my fault. That small gesture from his father gave me peace in a way I never expected. As time went on, I continued to heal. I went on a trip to Paris with my best friend, Laura, who had stuck by me through it all. What was supposed to be my honeymoon became an unforgettable sisterhood adventure. We wandered through the streets, ate delicious food, and laughed more than I had in years. It wasn't the romantic escape I had once dreamed of with Jacob, but it was better than anything I could have imagined. It reminded me that there were still beautiful, meaningful moments waiting for me. When I returned from Paris, I took a long, hard look at my life. I realized that, for the first time, I wasn't focused on what I had lost. I was focused on what I had gained: freedom, strength, and the ability to trust myself again. I never fully understood why Jacob had turned into the person he had, why he had allowed his mother's control to seep into every corner of our relationship. But I realized that the answers didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that I had taken back my life. I had chosen myself, and that was the most empowering decision I had ever made. The final piece of closure came when I sold the engagement ring, the one that had once held so much hope and promise. I didn't want to keep it as a reminder of the past. I sold it and donated the money to a domestic violence shelter. It felt like I was turning something painful into something good, something that could help others. I was stronger now, more resilient, and more in control of my own future. Jacob and his mother were in the past, and I had no intention of ever looking back. I had learned that true happiness comes from within, and it wasn't something anyone else could give me. As I moved forward, I knew that when I was ready to open my heart again, I would do it on my terms. But for now, I was content. I had rebuilt my life, step by step, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free. The future was mine to shape, and I was ready for whatever it had to offer.
Go ahead and file the divorce papers. I don't need the kids, he said, walking out the door, leaving me with our 3-year-old twins and our newborn daughter. I had my suspicions about his infidelity, but between parenting and work, I pushed them aside. I can't take this anymore. My twin daughters clung to me, their little faces full of worry. "Mommy, I love you," they said. In that moment, something inside me shifted. Despite my anger, I found clarity. "Fine, let's do it," I said, signing the divorce papers without a second thought. A bitter smile crept across my face. He has no idea what's coming. After all the support I've given him, he's the one who'll regret this. And so, unknowingly, he started his downfall. "I'll be late again tonight." How many times had I heard those words? I'm Maya, 34 years old. We married 4 years ago, and I spoiled him a bit, probably because he's 2 years younger. The next year, we had twin daughters, and 3 years later, our third daughter arrived. Around the time she was born, he began coming home late, constantly. He used to say, "I hope the third one's a boy. I want to play catch with him." He was excited during the pregnancy, but everything changed when he found out it was a girl. At the hospital, he frowned when he saw our newborn daughter. "She doesn't look like me. She's not cute." Anger surged through me. How could he say that about his own child? What kind of father says that? I think that's when I first considered divorce. Even after we came home, his mood didn't improve. As my maternity leave was ending, he barely helped with the kids. "Show some interest in them," I told him. "If you're overwhelmed, hire a babysitter." "You have savings," he replied. I had a solid job at a top company, earning more than most women my age. Meanwhile, he was constantly changing jobs, struggling to hold one down. Maybe he resented my success. At the time, he was doing temporary work, and I worried about how long that would last. Since I couldn't count on financial support, I at least hoped he would step up as a father. But when I asked him to spend time with the kids, he complained, "It's too much work." Even when he did help, it was half-hearted and the girls were bored. He noticed they didn't like him much, and it bothered him. This pattern continued until one day, he just stopped helping altogether. "I'm tired from work. I need my weekends to rest." He'd either shut himself in his room or go out with someone else. Today, I had to work, even though it was the weekend. "I'm stuck if you don't watch the kids. I have things to do. Bye." He refused to watch them. I couldn't leave them alone, so I often had to find a babysitter last minute. This was tearing our marriage apart and hurting the kids, so I decided to consult with his parents. Their response was disappointing. "A wife must endure. That's the key. And don't forget to take care of what I mentioned the other day." My parents live far away, so I rarely see them. I didn't feel comfortable calling them and didn't know who else to turn to. "Hey, make me some food." I came home one evening to find my husband in pajamas, the room a mess. The only bright spot was seeing my kids, bored with their toys, light up with big smiles when they saw me. "Where were you so late?" "I had some errands at your parents' house." "Now hurry up and make dinner. I'm starving." "If you've been home all day, couldn't you have done the laundry or cleaned the bathroom?" He smirked at my question. I've decided not to do anything for people who don't show proper gratitude. "What do you mean?" "I cleaned the bathroom yesterday, and you didn't even thank me." I'm sure I said thank you. "Not that kind of thank you. I'm talking about $200 as a thank you." He held out his hand, asking for money. I was too tired and frustrated to argue, so I called him to the bathroom to talk away from the kids. "I do everything, work, house chores, and take care of the kids. Haven't you ever thanked me?" "It's a wife's duty." "And what's your duty?" "I work too." Despite earning only $1,000 a month and doing nothing at home, he still had the audacity to demand more. We argued for an hour. "Mommy, I'm hungry." My daughter's voice pulled me back to reality. My husband stormed off, but I ignored him and hurried to make dinner. In the tense atmosphere, I uncovered his secret. My husband was having an affair. I confided in a colleague I've known since college. She had also divorced because of her husband's infidelity. "You should gather evidence right away," she advised, sharing tips on how to do it. I had suspected something for a while. Just before our youngest was born, I noticed a sweet scent on him that wasn't familiar. "Were you wearing perfume?" I asked casually. He started sweating and stammered. There were other signs: late nights, less conversation, his distance from the kids, and a lack of intimacy. But one incident confirmed it for me. "There was lip balm in your jacket pocket." "It's mine. My lips get chapped." "Are you using Channel's pink lip balm?" "Oh, well, maybe it's my mom's." His awkward excuse sounded like a lie. As he rushed to the bathroom, I saw it. What's that? It was a love bite in a spot usually covered by clothes. I almost confronted him, but decided I needed proof first. Take your time in the bath, I said, pretending not to notice. The next day, I got home late from work and found my daughters already asleep. The house was quiet except for the light in the dining room, where my husband stood holding a piece of paper. I've had enough. Let's get a divorce. What? You want a divorce? And you don't want the kids? He handed me the papers and walked out before I could respond. Mommy, the twins woke up from the sound of the door, looking worried. It's okay. Sorry for waking you, I reassured them, though things were far from okay. He says he's had enough. That's my line. And he doesn't want the kids. How could he? Tears flowed as emotions overwhelmed me, but I barely noticed. Mommy, I love you, my daughter said, hugging me tightly. At that moment, I knew I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't let my daughters carry this burden. If I only had them, I'd find happiness. I finally knew what I needed to do. Fine. Let's file the papers. I said it with determination, and my daughters smiled. That night, we all slept peacefully. The next morning, I submitted the divorce papers and made a call. Yes, go ahead. It's my husband who's going to be in trouble. The person on the other end listened and acted. I'd thought about this for a while. If my husband betrayed me, I'd make sure everything he'd done came crashing down, even if it meant his life would fall apart. No regrets. 3 days later, Maya, where were you? I came home from work to find my parents-in-law and husband waiting. My mother-in-law was angry, my father-in-law looked pale, and my husband seemed completely clueless. Did you wait outside the door the entire time? That's unsettling. This isn't the time for that. What's going on? She shoved a letter at me. It's a notice from a lawyer. It's pretty clear if you read it. Her face flushed red and her voice grew louder. I have to pick up the girls, so if you'll excuse me. I walked into the house, ignoring them. My furious in-laws followed me into the living room, insisting we talk. Why did you send this out of the blue? We don't understand. You'll get it when you read the letter. Using a lawyer is cowardly. Even though they were in the wrong, they quickly tried to flip the situation. Frustrated, I struggled to explain. Finally, my clueless husband chimed in. Is this because you're unhappy with the divorce and filing a complaint? My in-laws stared at him, shocked. Of course, he had no idea about everything I had done for them over the years. We never heard about a divorce. Is that why this is happening? Our son is completely useless. What's the rush? You've ruined everything. Hold on. What's going on? As their conversation went in circles, my mother-in-law slammed the table. Why did you divorce, Maya? Ah, well, my husband stammered, caught off guard. So I stepped in. Because he completely neglected his responsibilities as a husband and father. You keep saying men are like that, right? Would you forgive your father-in-law for cheating then? What? Clearly, she wasn't expecting me to mention her son's infidelity. My husband tried to speak, but a sharp look from me stopped him. Suddenly, my father-in-law defended his son. A man's affair is just a game. It's not a big deal. Arguing is pointless. Please leave. Any further communication will go through my lawyer. Why involve a lawyer now? You'll agree to the divorce, right? My husband looked confused. I've not only agreed, but I've already filed the papers. What, then why? As my husband and I argued, my mother-in-law started crying. How can you expect me to pay $39,500 all at once? What's with that amount? Who's getting paid? Finally, the moment I'd been waiting for arrived. I revealed my secret with confidence. 4 years ago, just after we got married, my mother-in-law asked to talk. I need to discuss something. Nervous, I agreed to listen, thinking I'd do anything for my new mother-in-law. But her request shocked me. Can you lend me $40,000? I was completely blindsided. She even asked about my annual income without any hesitation, leaving me stunned. I couldn't handle the pressure and blurted out my earnings. Maybe over $165,000. Her eyes lit up. Apparently, my father-in-law had become addicted to horse racing, blowing through money and racking up debt. She begged me, desperate for $40,000 to repay the debt, and I couldn't refuse. I made it clear, you must pay me back, before lending her the money. 4 years went by, and she only paid back $2,600. Sometimes she'd return some money, only to borrow it again. Realizing I'd never see the full amount, I hired a lawyer to demand the remaining $39,500. My husband's shocked expression almost made me laugh. I promised to repay it gradually. Why demand it all at once? We're no longer family. I don't need to be considerate. That's when my mother-in-law let out a screech, furious at my husband. You caused this with your affair. You should pay it instead of me. Why me? We're retired. Our pension won't cover it. If you want to stay in my house, listen to me. Of course, she couldn't pay the $39,500. And my husband was unemployed at the time. I'm going to live with Laura, so I won't pay. Is that your mistress? Tired of this back and forth, I decided to end it. Don't think it stops at $39,500. I'm also demanding $113,000 from both you and your mistress as compensation. And don't forget child support. What? You can't do that. It's only fair. It's the price for neglecting your kids and fooling around. Where's the proof I cheated? Have you already forgotten you just admitted you're moving in with Laura? I sighed and handed him the stack of evidence I'd gathered. I felt sick just looking at these. The photos were from his social media, showing him kissing and hugging his mistress. My lawyer had seen them too, and they were undeniable. Why do you have these? I found your social media online. It's pathetic you thought no one would find it. My foolish husband had left his account open for the public, posting carefree photos. It was surprising that someone so clueless about technology would be so careless, but it made gathering evidence of his infidelity easy. My in-laws were stunned, staring at him with their mouths open. All right, it's time for you to leave. I need to pick up the kids. At least don't go after Laura for compensation. What if she leaves me? I don't care. Since the situation wasn't getting better, I kicked the 3 of them out. Open up, help me. I didn't know about the debt. I could hear my husband yelling through the door for a while. I'll call the police. At that, they finally left, dejected. A year has passed since then, and after paying me compensation, the mistress disappeared. Now my ex-husband, stuck living with his parents, was pressured to cover the $39,500, so he borrowed from a shady dealer. I got my money back quickly, but he's still on the hook for the $113,000 in compensation and $330 in monthly child support. He's earning his daily wage doing manual labor from morning till night. The interest on his debt is piling up, and he might never repay it in his lifetime. But that's not my concern. Mommy, hurry up, or we'll be late. Oops, my daughters are calling. Time to head to the daycare. They're growing up so fast. That alone brings me joy.